All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Screen Club. My name is Sarah Nawrocki. I'm the director of Wealthy Theater, and I am joined today by Virginia and Caleb. How's it going, guys?
Great.
Just living in a nightmare that we are collectively a part of.
And
But other
that's-
than that, great.
That's why we got to talk about a spooky show, right? Let's just kind of go around the table. I already said I'm the director of Wealthy Theater, but also a co-founder of Cinema Lab. Virginia is actually the person behind Screen Club. So tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're here today.
Yeah, so my name is, as you can tell in this little bubble here, Virginia Anzengruber. I founded Screen Club in 2019 in partnership with Grand Rapids Community Media Center and Wealthy Theater as an effort to just sort of combine some of the things that I love, talking and television. But really it was born out of a similar ethos that Cinema Lab shares, which is we can really learn a lot from the stories that shape us. And television is that modern medium that we have all grown up with and has really advanced to a point where the nuances and the detail and intention put into television are just as impactful and powerful, if not more so than film. And the sort of the binge watch modality with which we all kind of now consume television has really become a new way for us to learn and absorb and kind of process more about what it is to be human. So I really enjoy the sort of sociological aspects of this. And also it's just really fun to talk about, how hot Sarah Paulson is. So I'm really excited to be here. And I'm excited that we're picking like a spooky thing. This year has felt weird. I'm sure we all can say that until we run out of breath, but it's nice to sort of immerse ourselves a little bit more into the Halloween season, especially in a time where it feels like, holidays have been a little amorphous this year. And this is a really moody, fun, spooky show. So I'm excited talking about it.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be here for this discussion. We also have with us Caleb Dillon, who you can see from his lower third is also from Wealthy Theater. So welcome, Caleb. Tell us why you're being dragged into this today.
Thanks. Hold on. My name is Caleb Dillon. I'm the front of house manager at Wealthy Theater. I like weird things. I like wacky things. I like wild things. And I especially like things that are colored very dramatically. So that's why I am participating today. And I'm going to try to be as nice as possible when discussing this show.
Awesome. Well, thank you as well for taking the time to watch all 8 episodes completely. Sure. I appreciate it. And so as we've said in the event description and all that this is supposed to be an interactive discussion. Normally we would hold Screen Club here at Wealthy Theater so that you could do kind of the book club style, put your hand up and tell us what you think. Doesn't matter if you love it, hate it, anything in between. But we really want to encourage folks to comment, and you can comment if you're watching on YouTube. I think you just have to be signed in. You can comment. If you're on Facebook, you can comment there, and we'll see these things pop up. So we would be happy to take questions and thoughts from the audience. So we're going to be going till about 7 o'clock today. We've got a bunch of questions, and I think that we might be short on time. I've got so much that I want to pick apart with this show, but why don't we start with the elephant in the room question? And Caleb, I'm going to ask you first. I'm also going to apologize in advance if you guys hear thunder. I specifically asked nature to make it spooky outside for this, so that's what that is.
Yeah.
Okay, the big question of the night. Caleb, did you love it or hate it?
Listen, I didn't hate it, okay? I did not hate it. I found a lot to enjoy about it. I don't know that I could recommend it. But there's a lot to look at. It's certainly one of the most stylish things I've seen in a while. There's 7 to 10 points that I could bring up that are great things about it. It was almost worth watching just for Sarah Paulson, honestly. And I really hadn't seen her in much of anything before this. I guess I would say that this being my first Ryan Murphy joint, it will also be my last. It was exactly what I expected it to be, but I don't mean that as such a horrible insult that it sounds like. So,
Okay. All right.
lots of good stuff.
Cool. Virginia, what about you? Love it, hate it, something in between?
So I don't have as dramatic of lighting to sort of set the mood for my takeaway, but
We'll fix it in post, don't worry.
yeah. Okay, good. So I kind of am in the middle, I think. I feel medium about it, which, as we all know, the opposite of love is not hate, it is actually apathy. And so I think there's a part of the story as a whole that the greater question for me is why, I guess, did we need the backstory of this character? And you, Sarah, had made a great point in sort of some of our pre-show notes about, I think NPR had sort of talked about it, and I'm going to be paraphrasing, but basically like Nurse Ratched, as we know her in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, is just a kind of representation of like someone who believes kind of in the process of the government and sort of what is, I'm just going to pull it up. She represents an inhuman and inhumane society and its crushing of the individual. So she's not meant to be thought of as a realistic or nuanced person. And so if we're working off of that theory or that takeaway, the idea that we're trying to humanize someone that in that film originally was such a dehumanizing character, not just dehumanized, but dehumanizing in the action she took to the patients and everything. It was an interesting leap for me, especially now, currently, to sort of be trying to scratch below the surface to maybe see the damaged baby Ratched underneath, and I will say, and I've been saying this a lot for all those hot fans that are following me on social media, I've been having a hard time lately consuming media that maybe in the past I would have found entertaining, but with our current state of the world, I now find very irritating, to the point that even earlier today, I woke up on the holiday day, I have the day off, and was just hanging out with my husband and my son, and we were watching Casino Royale, which was like a 007 movie. I say that with a question because it is, but and I hadn't really seen it all in one shot. I realized I had never really just sat down and watched it, and I caught myself being like, literally saying out loud, this movie is so stressful. Why are they always chasing each other? And why is this poker game days long? Where I might have normally, when it came out in 2006, I'm sure my takeaway would have been much more different. And now I'm sort of very aware of the nuances that we all have, and on a larger scale, how we're trying to governing bodies, larger factions are trying to both humanize and dehumanize things quite regularly. And so it was just a really interesting choice for, Mr. Murphy to sort of hone in on somebody that I don't know necessarily needed the illumination. That being said, Caleb, I'm personally offended you've never seen more of Sarah Paulson's work. She's
I'm offended myself, honestly.
I mean, she's a gift to the world. But if you're going to watch anything, if you decide to tip toe back into the Murphy waters, might I suggest American Horror Story Season 3, which is Coven. Sarah Paulson will forever be my supreme. People watching this who have seen the show know what I mean. There's something about her as a person, her as an actor, that is so intriguing to me that similarly I was finding myself watching it for her, right? Not necessarily for the story at large, but I was intrigued and enjoyed her performance. But there's a lot of brutal stuff in the show. So there's kind of those moments where you're just sort of like, oh, why are they all being mean to each other? Like that's a lot of my takeaway right now.
So to back it up to your original point of, did Nurse Ratched, the character that we know from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, did she need a backstory? Caleb, what do you think about that question?
Nope. But I'm unnecessarily harsh on all unnecessary backstories, which we just keep doing more and more as a society. You got to know the origin story of every villain, and you got to know the everything about every background character, and it really kind of ruins a lot of stuff for me personally, where I would have enjoyed the mystery a lot more, especially with a character like that. It was one of my first obstacles to get over with the show, honestly, because for the first couple episodes, I'm kind of just like sitting back. I'm like, all right, Nurse Ratched, what do you got? One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Sure, I've seen it. But I had to like just stop thinking about that and just think of it like, what if this was just a brand new show that was a new character that had no ties to any other, film or anything else, but then it always just makes me wonder, well, why didn't you just do that? If it was called literally just a different name, and it was the story of this nurse, and I think the only reason is because it's like, well, it sells because it's got the name recognition, and people go, oh yeah, right. Like, how does she become that? We'll see how she becomes that throughout the course of this. And speaking of name recognition, I do want to ask you guys if you think that this show would have been greenlit maybe about 10 years ago before the popularization of the term ratchet.
Oh.
I thought about that. Like, it came to mind when I'd like go to type the word, it popped up. But
I mean, it's a stretch.
I think that's
semi-serious, but
I think subconsciously, I think that does kind of get into a younger demographic that might not be as familiar with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest as our generation would be. Sure. So yeah, I don't know. I think that's a valid point. Virginia, what do you think?
I'm sure, that there's a bit of like a subconscious, element to it. But I also think similarly, like to your point, Caleb, I don't, that coupled with the Ryan Murphy kind of evolution of Glee to American Horror Story to Feud to Ratched to all of these kind of things, he just did Hollywood, that the buy-in to his stylistic kind of canon on top of the name, I'm sure that there was a little bit of a play in that. But and I mentioned this before, I have watched most of the series, so if this has happened and I missed it, please let me know. But like, I think it would have been more of a play if they would have kind of laid in some like modern music, kind of like with A Knight's Tale and stuff, where if they would have laid in some like hardcore rap tunes or hip hop music, maybe then I would have bought into that a little bit more. But because it seems to stay so heavy in the period that it was representing, I think maybe just a happy coincidence, but probably did really help with the marketing inherent, because it's a one-word title for a show, which is, again, if you have no context to what the series is, I was talking to my sister before I hopped on, and she's a nurse, and she was like, oh, right, that's the one with like the scary nurse, right? And I was like, yeah. But she hadn't seen the original movie either. So I don't know if the show would I think about it. That's a really good question, because I don't know if the show would have gotten greenlit without the Ryan Murphy presence, or just kind of it feeling a part of this like dynastic body of work. I don't know if it would have just solo style gotten greenlit, even 5 years ago, like, because it is it's a brutal show, it's a brutal, intense show. So I don't know if the conditioning that American Horror Story has done for us as an audience kind of helped maybe pave the way a little bit. But yeah, that's for some reason this year that has been the like at the forefront of my brain for so many of these things that we watch, is just sort of the time and place of which they exist, and how would it have been different 3, 5, 10 years ago, 10 months ago at this point, how would it have been different? So
I feel like we are getting close to spoiler territory, so I'm just going to go ahead and pop that up there, because my next line of questions, I think inevitably we're going to be spoiling stuff. So if you haven't watched the show and you want to, then you're going to want to turn this off. And don't worry, it's going to be archived on our YouTube channel. It should be still on the Wealthy Theater Facebook page too. We'll re-air it on GRTV as well. But I'm going to go ahead and say it now so we don't get anyone too mad of spoiling stuff. But yes, spoilers are coming. The entire show is going to be spoiled. So, okay, the One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Clearly, this is not a good, connection. This backstory doesn't quite fit her character in the original movie. I think Caleb's point is exactly what I was thinking when I got into it past the pilot of, I'm just going to watch this as its own thing. I think it's taking a character like this and writing a backstory for them is a really cool writing exercise, for a screenwriter or even just writing fiction. Should it have made it to the big screen? I thought it was interesting. I don't hate that I watched it or that it exists. I don't necessarily love it, but I really, really appreciate it. So I think it was a cool experiment, I suppose. But yes, if you were going to connect Ratched with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, it kind of messes up that character. But since it is connected, I'm curious what you guys think. And Virginia, I'll toss this to you first. Do you have any theory on how it's going to come full circle to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, or are we just totally going to be dodging that story?
Well, it's so interesting because so much of this season has really hit on her coming to terms with her own self, right? In part with her relationship with Cynthia Nixon's character, but also just, I think, herself as a professional woman. And then there's the whole kind of driving story with her wanting to be near her brother, her adopted brother. So it's I'd be interested to see how they do it, but I feel like it will come with a lot more trauma that she will have to kind of endure to sort of get to where she's at when we see her in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. But honestly, I feel like the Judy Davis character, sort of that monologue she has after the doctor is out of the picture, about sort of how they're going to run the hospital. But how they're now the ones running the hospital, and it kind of, to me, that character, that Judy Davis character, weirdly feels almost more like it could spiritually be connected to who Ratched becomes than actually Ratched herself. And I don't know if anybody
That's exactly what I thought. Yes.
I literally was like, oh, this makes more sense. I could see, because we see her being heartbroken by this doctor. She's humiliated by him at the dance. There are all these more classically traumatic things that we would know from other stories, right? That I could kind of pair and see her becoming so wounded that the only way she can do it is to harden herself, but it was really interesting. It did not feel like we were going to see, and it ended so abruptly with her on the phone, brother, I'm going to get you, or whatever. It just felt very far from where we see her in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. That being said, I will be interested to see what the next 8 episodes, because I think it was always intended to be 2 seasons. So I'm interested to see what those threads are in season 2, and sort of how far they're going to be stretched, because we kind of, at the end of the season, we end with her feeling kind of calm, from what I can, she's with her girl, and she's what, in Italy or something? She's on some sort of countryside, they're just chilling.
Oh, they're in Mexico.
Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
And her, her brother calls, and then that's the sort of that final note. So I'd be really interested, but yeah, for me, it was more of the Judy Davis character that I was like, this makes more sense. And I weirdly didn't even put it together until we were sitting here right now.
And just for anyone watching, Judy Davis is Nurse Betty Bucket here that you can see on the right, which we're going to come back to this particular scene in a little bit. But yeah, I had that same thought that Betty Bucket gives off more of that soulless, robotic kind of vibe of the classic Nurse Ratched that we know from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. But I mean, aesthetically, Sarah Paulson seems to match the original character more visually. You know, I think that it would be quite a stretch to say that Betty's character arc actually ends up being the Nurse Ratched we know. Caleb, what do you think about that?
That's one of the things that I enjoyed the most about the show. Actually, was my expectations were really subverted by Mildred's character from the beginning of the show to the end. You'd think that the way that they're going to do this is they're going to start with her being more of a human feeling character and then gradually harden her. And then at the end of the season, it's like, oh, okay, now she's Ratched, you know, like she's that like stone character. But actually it was completely the opposite. She starts in the first episode coming in like this Terminator, just taking control and being so icy and so unfeeling. And then I think it wasn't until really maybe the 6th or 7th episode where she had a couple of real emotional breakdowns. And I went, oh, wow, they're doing this in reverse. So maybe it's a way to keep people watching too, beyond that first season, to say, okay, well, so she turned into more of a human being. So what the heck happened between this point and then One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest?
If I can add to that, I just had a pal text me a question because she's watching, and her friend. So this is a question from Marta, and she asked a good question about the original novel and movie. If it's fair for Ratched to be considered a villain when she was really a woman in a working environment where she had little control and ends up getting very hurt. So in this moment where we're talking about her, I would be interested to like, do we consider her a villain? Do you guys think?
It's one of the things that hasn't aged really super well about the 1975 film. I remember the first time I saw it as like a young teenager. I thought it was great. I was fully on the side of McMurphy, and hated Ratched, and it was great. He was having he's having so much fun with all the other all the people in the hospital and all the patients, and just like really injecting some life into it. And she was this like life-killing presence. But I think it's one of those things that you watch it now and it's like, well, she's definitely cold and she's definitely stern, and she does not favor the individual or anything. But at the same time, like, he's not messing around with, it's not like this is an Animal House. Like these are psychiatric patients that need to be treated with care. And we should probably not even talk about the reason he's in the psychiatric ward in the first place, because that's extremely problematic. But yeah, she's definitely just doing her job. I don't know that I'd call her a monster looking back on it now. She's definitely a tough cookie, but
well, because I think there's a part of what this particular Ratched show is trying to do that is like humanizing her intentions, right? Like, aside from her boiling that dude alive, which was like the wildest scene for me when he like walked out into the hallway with his skin falling out. That was too much for me. But I think what their intent, as I can see it, is to kind of show like she does kind of think that this like lobotomy might help some, you know what I mean? Obviously there's parts of it that are much more self-serving and she's just trying to protect herself and stuff. But especially in her relationship with the Cynthia Nixon character, it seems like, yeah, the intent is to nuance her. The intent is to humanize her in a way where the film, it felt, I don't know. Again, I feel like it's been a while since I've seen it, but I think the intent was like you would be on the side of the Jack Nicholson character and not her. And thinking about the idea of how difficult a job like that would be, what you're up against versus like what you're tasked to do, which is keep these people as healthy and safe as they can be. There was a lot of those scenes where she was in the surgery opera room, where there's like those like raised seats, and they would like zoom in on her face while she was like watching the doctor do the procedure, and it was never like malice or menacing. It was genuinely like it for me it read as like curiosity. I don't know. It's so interesting. It's such an interesting character to try to humanize. Again, I keep going back to this, but yeah, I don't know if I'd call her a villain either.
We do need to remind ourselves, though, because I kept thinking about this throughout, that she hasn't actually, according to the show anyway, she hasn't actually paid her dues or gone to medical school or anything. She faked her way into the army being a nurse, and then she faked her way into this hospital being a nurse. So I don't think we should get like too sympathetic to her also.
But wasn't it because she was trying to get to be with her brother, right?
Yeah. But I mean, it wasn't even that, like, it's the first time you see a flashback to her in the war, she's a nurse in the army. But then later she reveals that she just kind of lied her way into that position also. So, you know what I mean?
And we actually have a follow-up from Marta. Let me pull it up here.
Oh, yay!
With the follow-up, doesn't the show, in humanizing her, disenfranchise her by taking away her nursing degree too? So thoughts on that?
I don't remember if she really has a nursing degree. I guess I didn't get that impression.
She maybe does in the original novel. I think that's maybe what Marta was saying.
Oh, I see, yeah.
Maybe. I mean, I think part of it is like also just thinking about the idea that one could like lie their way into being a nurse is really funny to me, because like, right. oh, the 60s, like, yeah, maybe that might be a way of doing it, because it's showing her trying to kind of achieve her goal of being back with her brother against all personal cost, right? Even kind of throwing away any sort of actual goals she might have had. But again, I feel like I didn't, maybe I missed some key scenes and stuff like that. I just remember, isn't the intent that she was like trying to save her brother, right? Because he got like, okay. That to me almost feels like the more humanizing point was that she was willing to do whatever she needed to do to kind of help him. But interesting, yeah, that they chose to make it that she faked her way in, because I guess that sounds like it's in opposition to how she is portrayed in the novel.
Well, and I think as far as not bringing in the original movie or novel, but just specifically with this show, I think very clearly the story has a lot of issues with it. I think that it needed a couple of passes, especially with the character development, because you're establishing Nurse Ratched, who we understand from, the previous source is supposed to be this villain, which I think I side with what Caleb's saying of like, when I originally watched it, of course, like she comes off as the protagonist and so I have to hate her. But now, being through more of life and experiences, I do look at it like, wow, I have been in that position where you have to like lay down the rules and, do that kind of thing. So I don't think she's a villain. But in this show, we go into it with that kind of understanding of who she is. And yes, there are some humanizing elements that come out, but I think that kind of makes the story and her character arc very convoluted of, is she an anti-hero? Is she, like, what even is she as a character? And I think we're coming into it thinking and assuming she's a villain, but if I can comment on that with this show specifically, I think it's very problematic in that we are still vilifying mental illnesses and non-heterosexual people because, they're treating patients who have lesbianism, you know what I mean? And spoiler alert again, Ratched comes out as a lesbian in this show. And then as far as mental illness, I mean, clearly she's suffering with PTSD from horrific childhood trauma. And I think you could attribute a lot of her decisions and her personality to a trauma that she hasn't healed from yet. And so trying to say like her, how do I want to say it, like her grounds for decision making, her motivation that's based off of like this horrific experience, we're categorizing as like evil intentions of what she's doing. You know what I mean? I think it's just like vilifying all the wrong stuff. And it's kind of surprising that Ryan Murphy went that way with the story, especially since the last thing he did, I believe, was Hollywood, which was supposed to be kind of spinning the story of, the golden age of Hollywood. And what if it pivoted, spoiler for that show too, what if it pivoted to be more accepting as far as like LGBTQ and people of color and that sort of thing? So I don't know, I was kind of turned off by that they're still leaning into some old habits of vilifying things like that.
Do you think that his intention was to have it come across as vilifying, or more of, justification isn't the right word that I want, but it's like the closest thing that I can find right now. Do you think it was more of intended to sort of show, to humanize her and sort of give that connective tissue of the why she would make decisions like that, where maybe sometimes we just see sort of one note villains that kind of just act without any sort of known intention behind it to the audience? Because I almost wonder if in that opposite way, that wasn't the intention. It's just that the execution was so middling that's how it ends up coming across to the audience, right? Is that it is sort of a justification is the best word that I can think of right now, of her sort of becoming this. But again, she doesn't even land to that really at the end of the series. So any of what we've like talked about, it all feels like half of whatever this story is supposed to become. And so I'm really interested, I guess, to see where they will go with it and building on sort of what we've seen for season 1. That being said, though, some of these backstory scenes, man, like, were so heavy-handed. And Sarah, you're moderating, and I keep trying to like ask you questions.
Go for it.
Sorry, but you have the masters in screenwriting, so you're the one to ask. Like, what was with all of the like, hey, you just saw the puppet show, and now we're going to go tell you about the thing that you just saw in the puppet show. Hey,
that was really noticeable. I thought that was a great scene, but then like immediately after, she just like recounts the whole thing. It's like, we just saw it. Like,
it was
we were there.
It was too reminiscent of the 4th book of Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, because the same thing happened there of like...
Same kind of puppet show in that one, right?
Oh God. I don't know what kind of Harry Potter you're reading, but no. But yeah, it's like that same thing of like, okay, this happened. Now I got to go talk to somebody else, and I'm just going to say the whole thing. You can paraphrase it. And I mean, you could have saved probably 3 pages of writing in there, which just writing 1 page of a script can be excruciatingly, I don't know, it's time consuming and exhausting. And so I'm seeing it as like probably 3 to 5 pages of her just recounting the story. I'm like, why? You don't need to.
Yeah.
We sat through it, and show don't tell. We don't need that exposition. We have already seen it in a way that is very spoon-fed too. It's like a play-by-play of the whole thing that happened with their childhood. And I don't think that was totally necessary either. I think that we can understand kind of the subtext of like, oh, the puppet starts going in this direction. We know where that story is going to go. You know what I mean? Like, we don't need all the details of it. And I feel like that kind of gets to something that I bumped on with this, as well as, and I think this kind of ties into what Virginia was getting at earlier of like, is this just graphic content and graphic stories for the sake of exploitation? Is that what it is? Like, did we need to go that deep with the puppet show? Did we need to show, like, I don't know, what did you guys think? Do you feel like some of that stuff was just gratuitous and exploitation, or do you think it really added to the show?
Yes, to the first thing. I think that, and I apologize for my lack of real experience with Ryan Murphy, but I think that one of the reasons he is Ryan Murphy is because he is the one who delivers those shocks, and people who especially like to binge watch new shows like that kind of, okay, exposition, talking, and then like, oh my God, what was that? Like, screaming at the TV. I can't believe I just watched that. It's almost like shocks for people who would never willingly go into a horror movie, but it's like, oops, surprise, it's in your show, and like you just, we got you, which is really entertaining and fun. But I don't know that it ends up being substance-wise something that we all necessarily need either. I mean, it's easy to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to like, oh, a guy like cut off his arms and legs. Let's show it. Cool. But like, of course you show it. Like, it's so obvious. Like, that's not, I don't feel like that's skillful execution. No pun intended.
Well, I would agree. And a lot of times I think that some of the scarier delivery of scenes, one of the films that we've talked about a lot in regards to Cinema Lab lately is The Witch. And like one of the more strong points about that movie in particular is like, you don't see Black Phillip till the very end. You don't know that it's real until the very end of that movie. So part of the journey that you go on as an audience member is living almost vicariously through that first person character in the film to be like, oh, well, what is happening? And we are, and so much of this just being like, no, in case you missed it the first time, this is what happened to her. And it was very, and they really laid the groundwork for being heavy-handed in this particular series in like scene 4 of episode 1, when she goes to like bang that dude in her hotel room and is like, has like the weirdest like role play kind of things that she wants to get into, and you kind of immediately are like, oh God, okay, this is where we're going with this. And I
like that scene. That was one of the first scenes I actually liked, where I was like, oh, cool, yeah, weird.
It was just weird. And like, I think too, the choice of scene partner too, I'm blanking on that actor's name, but I feel like always plays kind of like these darker characters as well. It kind of set me up emotionally to be like, okay, this is where we're at tonally. We're going to be talking a lot about, there's going to be a lot of like when I was a kid stories. And I admittedly have not watched every Ryan Murphy iteration of everything. But I think to your point, Caleb, there is a lot of that gratuitous violence in American Horror Story. I think in some of the earlier seasons, it was a lot more reserved. Which is why I keep going back to Coven, which is like the 3rd season of American Horror Story, kind of being my favorite for many reasons. But a lot of it, when they chose to do those more explicit scenes, it felt peppered in to sort of advance the story. It felt purposeful instead of just like exploitative, where here even, I keep going back to that burned off skin scene, and it was just like, why couldn't you have just like killed him with like a scalpel to the neck? Did you have to boil him alive? Like, what, we're going to these real extremes here. And to that point, I do think that was a callback to the film, right? They're trying to mirror that particular, there's like the tubs in the warm baths in the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So I think it was trying to kind of call back to that, but it felt unnecessary at some points. And not to contextualize this as like the only way that one could make a turn, but since I have become a parent in the last year, things hit differently for me now. And so part of it is just like, damn, if you're going to kill him, just kill him the way that you would like kill a fly or something quick. You're not trying to cause pain to why are we boiling people? Like, that's what I just keep coming back
Why
to.
are we boiling?
Why are we boiling
2020,
people?
why are we boiling?
That's
we
the
don't have to be
question of the
boiling
night.
people, and so that's just, I would definitely say that sometimes it feels unnecessarily gratuitous.
And so a point that you made earlier with, I think you said American Horror Story, of peppering it in for the sake of like propelling the story forward. I'm all for that. I'm not sitting here trying to be a prude saying I don't like horror, because I love Ari Aster. I love Lars von Trier. I love some of those really nasty, you can probably only watch it one time in your life kind of movies. And I'm all for it, but my problem is, I think, in exactly that it's not propelling the story forward. And I mean, anyone who's in any aspect of filmmaking, you understand like how every shot, every beat, every word with a script, everything is like, it's precious, you know? If you're shooting on film, like shooting with 16 millimeter, I remember my teacher said, okay, when you start rolling and you hear it, it's $1, $2, $3, $4, you know, you don't want to waste any time. And I think that's my problem is like, you could have taken a big chunk out of retelling the puppet story or even the actual visual of the puppet story. You could have saved those 5-10 minutes and put that towards more character development or something that would like tie some loose ends together. That being said, I think that there are some moments that do propel the story forward with this like really gratuitous violence that's fantastic. Like with the lobotomy, oh my gosh, like just so cringeworthy that you have that POV shot.
No.
You have the ice pick coming right at your eyeball. You know what I mean? Like there's stuff like that just gets under your skin, almost literally. And it does propel the story forward because like in this shot, you can just see this cold face. You know, there's like no emotion to it. She's just very methodical. I got to get this done. This is my mission and nothing's going to distract me. I don't care about the fact that I'm about to stab somebody in the brain right now. You know what I mean? And that shot goes back to the Nurse Ratched that we knew going into this show. And like, I wanted more of that stuff, but then we stray away. But it kept feeling like it's going, you know, OG, new line, you know what I mean? Like back and forth. So anyway, my point about the excessive violence is really more so in the vein of you're wasting precious time on screen.
And also, sorry, you go ahead.
Something we need to keep in mind is I think it's a real symptom of our times. We all love our new shows that there's, 8 or 10 episodes and they're an hour long and, 45 minutes long, whatever. Love to binge them. But what you run into a lot of times, and what I think this show ran into, is a lot of padding because there's a certain order that there's a deal that's made between Netflix and the production company and Ryan Murphy, and you give us 8 shows for 4. Maybe they wanted 10 shows, and he negotiated down to 8 because he's like, I can't do 10 shows. I can only do 8. But in the meantime, he's got to fill up that time. Like he's got to fill up that airtime.
The B side of that, though, is look at the work that he has to do in season 2 to connect to the character that we know. Like what we kind of started by saying is like, now there's so many unanswered things that are going to start season 2, and this character that we know feels so far from this other version of the character that we know that I almost feel like he's made more work for himself in that, right? Like in lengthening things that didn't need to be lengthened and not truncating the story, like not in opposition to your point, but just to yes and it. Like I think now there's just more work narratively that has to be done to make the season 2 a payoff that would feel not worth it, but you know what I mean? Like it would feel justified in the characterization, I guess.
Well, my question to you two that I was thinking about as I was watching this was, would this have been better as a 2.5-hour film? Would this have been better as 2 2-hour films? And why wasn't it made that way? Other than the fact that Ryan Murphy loves TV and TV loves Ryan Murphy and people love 8 or 10 episode seasons of things. But do you think it would work better as a longer film?
I think it would have been executed better in the same vein of like storytelling and character development and all that. Yeah. But I think it works well for the platform. Like we've said many times, this is a binge-worthy show and people are looking for shows to binge. And I mean, it's a beautiful show to watch too. So you kind of forgive some of the other flaws of it. But yeah,
sure,
it would have been better had it been a feature film. Probably could have gotten all this in a 2-hour, but maybe 2 movies. What do you think, Virginia?
I mean, I would agree, and I think from just a writing standpoint, when you're pressed to your point, Caleb, which I think is really actually a super brilliant observation. It's like when you have all of this real estate to fill, I think the narrative itself maybe becomes a little less of a focal point And if you were to have a 2.5 hour movie and I have to tell this story in 2.5 hours and not 8 hours, I think you become a little bit more precious about what you're willing to keep and what you're wanting to cut. So yeah, I would imagine that it would probably have been better. It would have been a bit more just direct and to the point. That being said, again, if the goal is to humanize this person that we know as someone that is fairly dehumanized, you probably need a little bit more time than just 2.5 hours to do that. Again, I don't know if it's been executed properly within the 8 hours we've seen so far, but I think you would need more, which is why I think the concept of this lends itself well to actually having a series, because then you get to play around with a little bit more stuff. But you run the risk of losing the trust of your audience if you don't do it well in round one, which is what I think we're kind of all circling in different ways. And not, listen, making anything is hard. So I'm not going to ever be like, well, this is terrible. Like, no, like it's not. There are obviously things that could have been better and more well executed. But at the end of the day, I think, I don't know. Again, it's like 2020, so I'm just happy that like entertainment people had jobs for a while. Like there's like a part of me that's like, but think of how many people the show employed. It was great, So I don't know, but I also don't know if I would have been interested to watch it if it was just a movie and not a Ryan Murphy thing. Again, it goes back to, is the packaging more interesting than the actual content of what's inside the box a little bit?
Yeah. It's just something interesting to think about, because I think that a lot of times we assume that the creators they have nothing but the best intentions for the creation. But I think that a lot of business and a lot of negotiations and deals are behind a lot of those things too, that we forget, like, well, maybe they kind of said, no, we need 8 episodes because we want it to be a whole thing that people can watch. We're not going to do it in 4 episodes. We're not going to do a 2-hour movie, So.
I think that's very accurate. So we only have about 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we get into some of the aesthetics of this as well. But before we move on, I just want to post this comment, which it's a little bit longer, so I don't know if it's going to like really shrink the text on here, but it's from Marta. Yeah, you can see it. Okay. So this is an interesting point that Call the Midwife takes place in almost the exact same time period as when Nurse Ratched is doing her thing. So the question is, do you think in the current climate that the timing of the show was appropriate in that, it's like kind of a bad slant on nurses and mental health care and that sort of thing? It's interesting to think of these two at the same time, but yes, I feel like Nurse Ratched is more of like kind of a negative slant on healthcare in some regards. But what do you guys think about that?
So I've seen a little bit of like the first season of Call the Midwife, and emotionally what I will go back to is a joke by the comedian Ron Funches, who talks about how he loves the Great British Baking Show, but the whole punchline of his joke is, if we did it in America, it would just be called Murder Cake. And I think that aesthetically, right, we're talking about two different cultural shows as well. Call the Midwife is like very British, like, and I love that, but I also think a lot of times the driving force behind British television versus American television is going to be a lot more, and that show is kind of brutal too, right? Because it does show like real women having not really showing like full childbirth, but kind of leans into how hard it was to kind of be pregnant and at that time. So I think it more aesthetically probably lends itself to just British television versus American television, and the fact that American television loves murder cake. Do you know what I mean? We just love somebody boiling somebody. We love it,
Speak for yourself, Virginia.
I hate it, but we like that's what drives us, I think.
I love to see it.
Is that the extremes? But that would be my first response to that question.
Yeah. Caleb, any other thoughts you want to add to that?
The show is set in 1947. I don't know that we should really be pulling too many parallels between now and then, unless we're specifically looking at things like, oh, this thing was going on in 1947. Why are we still dealing with it today? I think those are the things to focus on. But, we're not doing lobotomies anymore. Lobotomies? Are you kidding me?
No, it's not lobotomy. I was looking it up, and I can't think of the word, but it's something similar, but it's like taking a part out. But it's not an ice pick in the eyeball. It's different and for treating like seizures. So I don't know. But I got an ice pick handy in case anyone's having trouble. Okay, well, let's shift, because like I said, I really want to make sure we get into the aesthetics, and there's a lot more that I don't think we're going to be able to get to today. But this show clearly pays homage to Hitchcock quite a bit. And that's one of the things that I really loved about it. And there's some other kind of neat pop culture references in here. But I think I fell in love in the first episode, and this other picture might be in episode 2, but we get the green hue that comes over on top, which of course is a nod to, let me pull it up here, Vertigo. You can't not think about that. And not to say that that Hitchcock like owns the color green per se, but it's just neat in the context of like horror, psychological thriller, that kind of thing, to like have a little bit of a nod to it. We also have the color red comes up in the same fashion of like the hue kind of being thrown over top of the image. This particular shot, I really love it too. I couldn't get like I couldn't do a screen grab of the video, but the camera is dollying in slowly as he's inhaling, and then as he exhales, it kind of dollies back, and it's so beautiful. I really love it. But
Yeah, that's cool.
what do you guys think about the colors? What do you think, like this green, what do you think it represents? I mean, we see it pop up a couple of times when Mildred is walking down the hallway, as you can see on the right there. I believe the first time that we see it come up is that image on the left where the nurse aide is in the bathroom, doing it with this dude when she shouldn't be. What do we think that color green means?
I sort of lost track. The first couple episodes, especially, they make a big use of that transition where it's flooded with green or flooded with red. And I sort of meant to keep track of those more, and I did not. I didn't feel like they were employed as much as I thought they would be. Like those first couple episodes, I felt like it was a thing that definitely happened once an episode or twice. And then they sort of stopped doing it halfway through a little bit as much. So I don't know. I also read, related to this, I read a thing that someone was commenting on the colors of some of the costumes correlating to certain emotions and representations of their characters as well. Not that I have anything more to say about that, but I thought it was interesting. Right down to the costuming, that would also indicate something about the person's character.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, like right off the bat, when Mildred arrives, she even has that like scarlet letter on her jacket. You have a powerful color of red. You also have her iconic car that she's driving around that matches, the attire. Let me pull up the shot of the uniforms there. So you're kind of setting the stage tonally with the color there. But I think as far as, and sorry, I'm going to toggle back to this, as far as the greens coming up, I mean, for the shot that's on the right here of her like barreling down the hallway and looking really serious and in charge, I kind of took green as like envy, power, life, a little bit of greed, but in the sense of like power hungry. And she walks in on this girl, I can't remember the nurse aide's name, but when she walks in, like it's green, and I feel like that's kind of where her like power hunger ignites right there, because that's what she's going to use to get her job, right? Mm-hmm. So this is the girl that she has that meeting with that's like, you're going to hand me your job. I'm going to take this position. And just like says it how it is. So I think that this color is popping up when it's supposed to represent that of like, she's inhaling this power. and this like greed, and it's like her life is just really igniting right there in the best way possible. What about Red though? What'd you guys think? Because Red wasn't used quite as much, and I was trying to scrub through quickly before we were hopping on tonight. This is the one image I found. I couldn't find another one, but I could have sworn there was one that was on Mildred, but maybe not. But what do we think Red is representing in this scene in particular?
And maybe this is completely wrong, but there's almost a sense of like weakness that I see. There's this like he's doing something that's like intentionally hurting himself, and almost the sort of negative effects that could have on him as like a person. Like I similarly with the green, I was like, oh, envy, and sort of, but with the red, it almost feels like sadness, kind of like despair, not necessarily like evil or anything, although the doctor wasn't like a great guy. It felt more like sadness to me, like isolation, sadness, despair, and the fact that he is, just doing drugs. So literally and figuratively, like hurting himself, hurting his career, all of these things. Maybe just feels like sad, sort of just a little bit like self-harming is kind of the vibe I got from that.
Well, I can tell you that because it's fresh in my mind. I just watched the last episode earlier today, and the last instance of the full red wash is when Mildred is asking how her brother's execution will go, and I think it's Nurse Bucket is describing the scenario, and when Edmund is laying there on the table and they inject him with something, it goes full red and he dies while it's fully red. So that sort of supports what you're saying, Virginia. I don't remember necessarily all of the other instances of it. You could probably do an hour-long seminar just on the use of color in this show. Yeah.
Well, similarly with the way you were saying about the A on her shirt, Sarah, too, or sort of, it wasn't an A necessarily, but,
the scarlet letter.
Yeah, the intentional uses of red. I think of red a lot of times, too, as that, like, seductive, right? Red light special is like a whole thing. And, but the idea that kind of is vilified here within the story, even as much as like the motel owner is giving her, grief at the beginning of when we first, you're not going to have any gentlemen visiting, are you? It being like super weird and like puritanical. I think there's sort of that element of just harm is sort of what I get with the red. But really, an intense red like that is never like a calm palette. There's never any like instances of that I've really seen where people are just like, drinking tea and having like a nice calm time. Feels heightened.
Right. Well, and we've seen it in like Kill Bill, and I know the color is kind of thrown off here, but in Kill Bill, when she, sees the villains, it does this kind of like superimposed image, goes red. And then also in Vertigo, there's another pull to that. Here's the opening sequence in red like that. And I think what we're seeing here, I think you guys are pretty spot on in that, like, there's kind of a sense of sadness. I think fear for sure, a little bit of vice in there too. Not so on the nose of like seeing red per se, but I think that there's some, secondary meanings to the colors, which is really interesting. Okay, I know we're going to go a little over on time here. I hope you guys are all right with that.
Oh, no.
Okay, goodbye. So,
no, let's do 2 more hours. Come on.
All right, cool. I'm into it. So in preparing for this discussion, I kind of went back through, I was trying to get some pictures to pull up here, but then also wanted to revisit the beginning of the show. And it's been a little bit since I watched it because I just like plowed through it when it first came out. And I remember when I was watching the pilot, I was really confused, and I actually had to watch it 2 times. Like, I was going to give up on the show, but you got to always go past the pilot because it's almost always a bumpy intro to the show. It's hard, you're trying to lay the groundwork for everything. And so going back through it and rewatching the beginning, I feel like I have a much, much greater appreciation for the whole setup with it. And I totally forgot that it opens with a church service. Like, I remember, of course, the whole thing with a priest, but this is the opening shot. Sorry, it's kind of cropping a little weird there, but so we have a crucifix, which is at the end of the hallway, and interestingly enough, that single point perspective, the vanishing point, is the same as at the end. This is the last shot that we see. But the crucifixion, the image of that, and the voiceover is the priest who, again, spoiler alert, gets killed first, and he's saying, "God have mercy on our souls," something kind of to that effect. What do you guys think is the point of opening on a crucifixion? What do you think that represents? Why do we have that to establish the show? Your opening shot is, I mean, that's going to set up the show. Like, it's really important to have something pretty solid, pretty significant. So why do you think he chose that? Yes, so Virginia.
I'll take this one as a current agnostic who was raised Southern Baptist. I think anytime there's a highlight on the crucifixion of Christ, there's almost always going to be an emphasis on the fact that it was a something that was done to him, but that multiple people had to sign off on, right? So if you're not deep within Christian lore is the wrong word, but Christian history and theology. There were multiple people that had to basically okay Christ being executed in the way that he was with a crucifixion. And the time period, crucifixion was actually almost exclusively saved for like violent or extreme criminals. So the people that he was next to, I believe, were like basically career criminals. It wasn't like the first choice for a punishment for somebody. But there's also a character in the Bible named Pontius Pilate who basically, as the story is told in the scripture, it basically he washes his hands of it. And so he doesn't necessarily believe that Christ deserves to be crucified, but he also does not really care enough to like rock the boat and or save him or really do anything using any of his power to affect change for this individual person. So anytime I really see somebody highlighting really Christian iconography like the crucifixion, I always kind of come back to this idea that it takes a lot of people to sort of perpetuate and or make something like that happen. So for me, there's a real obvious mirror into the system as a whole of the hospital, sort of not only declining more and more into a lack of proper management and care, but in so many instances, there are people that could have said, no, maybe this isn't like the best way to go, but for various reasons decide to just kind of push forward and continue on. Sometimes they think that maybe they're helping, but a lot of times maybe just because they don't feel like, the first time the Judy Davis character sees the lobotomy, she like throws up in the operating room and the doctor like scolds her in front of everyone for like throwing up, when that feels like it was a very natural physical and psychological response to seeing something like that. So anytime I kind of see that, I go back to this idea of like, it kind of took a village, it took a group, it took multiple people saying, yo, this guy's going to the cross before that happened. And so similarly in this show, I think there could be a really easy parallel to just like a group of people kind of have decided that this is how they're going to run this hospital. And these are the procedures that they're going to do, regardless of whether or not they're humane or actually torture. Like they're going to just keep on keeping on because it's easier to like keep your head down and keep going than to try to stand up and make a difference for individual people, I guess. Was that way too Bible kid? Or sorry.
No, I think that's good. So you're looking at it more of what led up to the crucifixion being paralleled to the kind of primitive way that the hospital is running. Is that right?
Yes, but also this idea that it's not just one person sort of making these choices. It's multiple people have to sign off on it. And that oftentimes I think can be even more arresting than like the idea that one person could save you or intercede and say, yes, sorry, my glasses have terrible glare. The idea that one person could intercede and change something for someone, but chooses not to. And then it keeps going down the line and more people have a chance to intercede, but they don't, is a very interesting exposition of groupthink, kind of, I guess.
That's interesting. All right. Caleb, what do you think about it?
Well, I don't have much to say about it, but again, just having the last episode fresh in my mind, or the last 2 episodes, the final scene of when Edmund is still in the basement prison, the final scene where Mildred comes to him and she's planning to take him out to the barn and euthanize him. She definitely speaks the words either "I gave my life for you" or "I sacrificed my life for you" to him. So there's got to be something there, especially if that's first episode, last episode.
And that's the way that I took it. At first I was like, okay, is this foreshadowing all the sins that are going to be laid out in front of us, whether it's something that has happened or somebody that's going to sin in the show, and kind of in that, like, the Catholic guilt and, that sort of thing? Is that what it's representing? Or I think where I'm landing more is Ratched as a martyr. Is she, not to say she is Jesus Christ, but in this, that she is making the ultimate sacrifice for her brother. And if you think in regards of, like, the crucifixion, it's in parallel to her storyline. I don't think so much as, like, her actions of what she's doing currently within the story of trying to help him out. I don't think that's what, like, the crucifixion is. I feel like it's everything from her childhood, everything that led up until the story starts, of what she's been through, and this journey is like that crucifixion to help somebody else. So that's interesting. I don't think there's necessarily a right answer. I mean, maybe we can get Ryan Murphy on the horn to answer that question, but it's interesting to, like...
What if he was just like, I don't know, I just think Jesus is hot, I just really wanted to show, like, a shirtless Jesus,
right? To each their own. But if we're going with that theory, and again, I'm really sorry that I didn't, like, crop these pictures properly, but if we're going with the theory of Ratched as the martyr, it's interesting, again, with this perspective. You have the vanishing point is that singular perspective in the middle, and it's Jesus on the cross, versus the very last shot with the vanishing perspective, and Ratched is landing there in the middle. I think that you could, pull those two together and make it, a bookended thing. But hey, that's just my my little thought there.
Great.
Yeah.
I know that there's a whole lot more that we could get into, and maybe we'll have to do a part 2 or something. But I think that we covered a lot of ground here, and hopefully, I know we had a couple comments come through, but if you got more comments, let us know. We can continue the conversation online on Facebook. And if you have any suggestions of any shows or movies that you viewers want to discuss like this, let us know. I mean, we could nerd out and do every TV show and movie we've ever seen, but we're trying to pick stuff that people would be interested in. Speaking of, our next virtual discussion that the 3 of us are going to be part of is going to be happening on October 22nd, which is a Thursday, again at 6 o'clock. We'll be doing it in the same format online that you can comment below with your thoughts, your questions, your theories, all that good stuff, and we're talking about The Witch. Not really for the faint of heart, but you should probably know that with any A24 horror film. But The Witch is really fantastic, and I think it'll be good to get into some really dark, spooky stuff just before Halloween. So mark your calendars. We'll be back for that discussion. Any last thoughts, you guys? Last comments? Anything you want to throw in?
Go watch any Hitchcock that you haven't seen. Go watch any Brian De Palma that you haven't seen. Go watch any Douglas Sirk movie that you haven't seen. That's all I have to say.
Excellent. Virginia, anything from you?
I have 2 thoughts. One, I need to know if Sarah Paulson's agent exclusively gets her roles that are smoking. Said this multiple times. I really got to get to the bottom of that question, because I think, like, the last, like, half a dozen roles I've seen her in have been just, like, a chain smoking lady, which I'm all here for, except for that smoking is terrible for you. And then as an antidote to maybe any of the heaviness that you might feel watching this show, do go watch Great British Baking Show or something equally British with equally low stakes, because I think right now, I don't know, maybe I'm saying this more to myself as well as everybody. If you're feeling like you aren't taking a lot of joy or being able to consume a lot of the things that you were able to consume just a year ago, like, it's okay. You're not alone. Like, we're all processing all of just the day-to-day life in the best way that we can. And so it's okay. Like, if you even haven't seen this show, if you don't want to, that's okay. Like, there are things you can skip if it's just not bringing you joy, if it's not making you feel balanced during this time. Like, it is totally okay to just go watch a bunch of like old Star Trek reruns, because they are feel good kind of stuff. So whatever is helping all of us get through is what we should be doing right now. That got very like real life, but that's okay. I can only make so many Sarah Paulson smoking jokes before I have to just, get real with people. So
yeah. All right, you two, thanks again for taking the time to watch the show, to gather your notes, and to be here tonight to talk about this. It's always a pleasure, and I'm really looking forward to talking about The Witch in a week. I don't know, probably tomorrow. Don't know. Yeah. Does time exist?
Time doesn't exist anymore.
Not sure.
So it's going to be, 10 days from now is an hour from now. So.
Yeah. So I got to go take a nap. I'll see you guys in an hour. Anyway, Thanks so much, viewers. Thank you for tuning in and watching. Until next time, we'll see ya.